when you're thinking, I don't deserve this pain, take it to the arms of the Comforter, the one who loves you. Hello, everybody, and welcome to podcast 109 of the Gordon and Cherise show. So what we took as originally, it was going to be one maybe episode. This is now the third part in a 4-part series about I don't deserve this pain. How many times, let's be honest, does that come up into the mind as people are processing whatever pain they're going through?
Absolutely, Cherise.
I don't deserve it.
Do you know how many times it just pops up into me where I think, okay, I've run the race. Mm-hmm. I've dealt with chronic pain for years. This is decades. But still we have heaps of adversity and problems and more pain that come on top where you just feel, you get weary and you just say, I just don't deserve this pain anymore.
That's right. Or just being a caregiver and saying, I don't deserve more. You know, there has to be an end to this.
Well, you made that very transparently known to me last night.
Uh-oh.
So.
Oh, okay. Are you going to tell on me again?
So but we all get to that point. We all get to that point where we feel like we've reached the end of ourselves. We're just sick of it. We're tired of dealing with pain. But what's apropos for this, and I think one thing that I want to mention, because I have to restart this process several different times. I know when I first had pain, my first inclination was to deal with it with all my strength.
Did you find that to be a limited proposition?
It limited even after a few years.
Yeah.
I tried to fight through it. I thought if I can get rid of this pain if I just do this, and this should go away. And the same thing even pops up now, even though I'm a person who earnestly is trying to follow the Spirit of God. Mm-hmm. There's times in my flesh with pain that pop up, and then my first instinct is not necessarily to move into the Spirit, okay? But it's to try to deal with the pain again.
Yeah.
And what happens is I have a much quicker mindset, a shift or a pivot that I make towards the Spirit now, and I look at eternal things. But I think one of the things is this. We heard it from a pastor, Pastor Bill Johnson, when his wife passed. Mm-hmm. It was a week later he gave a sermon. He said, mourning, sorrowful mourning brings hope.
Isn't that an amazing paradox?
That's an amazing paradox. Sometimes when you're at the end of yourself, maybe you need to cry those inward tears.
Or outward.
Yeah. And maybe you need to cry those tears, not to say, woe is me. Mm-hmm. You know, Cherise, I need you to have more self-pity for me. That's very unhealthy, actually. It'll wear down your partner if you've tried to do this for year after year. I think it's more of, okay, we're here. I'm mourning over this. But you know what? Mourning also turns to glory. In mourning, we can rejoice even on the next day. So it's moving from a process of A to B, and it helps us to move a little more quickly.
Yeah, and I think you said something so important, and just let me reemphasize that mourning isn't about self-pity. Those are two different things.
Correct.
And self-pity will only keep you in the pit. It will trap you in the pit. It's not going to bring other people with you and align with you. It'll drive away your connections and leave you in a very isolated place. The self-pity part, and listen, we can all get there. I can get there in like 2 seconds flat if I want to really think about it. But when I'm so glad that you mentioned it. I'm so glad that you're identifying the word mourning. out of this. And Gordon, before you go on, because I know you've got so much to say about it, let me ask you, do you have, so for you, what exactly are you mourning, or were you mourning when that comes up in you? What is it that you're identifying as mourning?
Part of the mourning is also, it's like if mourning was a dish to eat that we had a select hunger for or an appetite for. It's also seasoned with instantaneous forgiveness. And so for me, those are my desires. It's not that when the pain comes again, Cherise, it's not that I want to go back to the old person.
Right.
And
you can't.
I don't even have the desire.
Yeah.
I don't have the desire to go back there. What happens is as you're moving forward in the race, whoosh, another wall of pain pops up. Mm-hmm. And there's times where that is so frustrating because you see the progress. You start to see the glimpse of God. You see hope. You see eternal value. You see what's going to come behind the curtain, what is waiting for each one of us in glory. Mm. You see good things, but pain still unexpectedly pops up. So I deal with mourning more of, let's get into that phase so I can instantaneously have forgiveness and learn how to embrace the suffering I'm in. And we're going to talk about that a little later in the podcast.
Well, as you said, and Bill Johnson prefaced in his message that it brings hope, ultimately. Absolutely.
And he also mentioned this, that the mourning, okay, it will either move you to the Comforter through the Holy Spirit, or this painful grief, in a sense, will take you into a mindset of unbelief. So when the pain pops up again, I know for me, it's not that I'm moving in unbelief. I find myself almost in a hurry to move towards God.
Wow.
Okay. But that mourning, Matthew chapter 5, verse 4, we've all heard it, but those words become very impactful to each one of us who are suffering from pain. Blessed are those who mourn. Mm-hmm. You're allowed to mourn, folks.
Yeah.
For they shall be comforted. You will receive comfort from God for any and all afflictions.
Amen.
Okay, that's why we're doing our podcasts. We're not doing our platform based on, okay, if this person has 4 surgeries and chronic orthopedic or neurological compromised conditions, they fit into our category, and that's where our platform is. No, our platform works because the source of healing, who is God, who can help change you mentally, where your emotions line up properly, where your body responds, and where you do have that hope when you're mourning, okay, applies to any and all afflictions. That's what's so powerful.
It's amazing.
Okay?
I mean, why would we need a comforter, Gordon, if we didn't have mourning?
Right.
If we didn't have a reason to need comfort? So it's amazing to me that God knew this from the beginning of all beginnings, before we were created, that it would be messy on this earth, and that you would be sad, you would grieve, you would need mourning. But he also knew that he had to send himself in the form of his Spirit as a comforter, as our comforter.
That's right.
And I think that that's amazing. So I think if somebody, there's so many people, and I've been one of these, where I've denied mourning at different times in my life. I've just pushed it aside. And for me, I became a workaholic. I did anything to numb the pain by trying to just outrun it, so that I didn't have to face my own version of mourning through pain in our marriage, through pain of your pain, through my own pain, so workaholism, all of those things. And I realized I was moving away myself from comfort because I was trying to soothe the things that would mourn, that I was really just needing to just get a perspective on and mourn about. I needed to mourn.
Well,
but it doesn't mean that I needed to stay in a state of perpetual darkness and perpetual, just depression. Mourning doesn't mean that I have to become a person that accepts that depression becomes my identity. But it does mean to acknowledge that when you're going through something really hard, face it.
Yeah.
That's the lesson I wish I could have told the younger version of me.
Right.
A long time ago. Face the pain.
Well, I'm not trying to point fingers. I'm trying to bring a point to people. When you said that you basically skipped the process of mourning, you tried
for a period of time.
You tried to have control over your own comfort.
And you, in a way, you said you did too.
Right.
With your pain, you've tried to muscle up through it.
Well, it's natural. And I call it the everyone else syndrome. See, the message for comfort applies to everyone. But sometimes we live our life by everyone else but me.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've noticed with you, I might have the pain. And there's a part of you that also says, I know he's got it handled. He's spiritual. This will happen. That'll happen. Boy, but I want to help him. I can't help him. I almost have to leave Gordon over there. I have to stiff arm basically his energy that he has in the room. I have to just stiff arm him, move him here. And then you tend to pile stress on to feel more productive, to create a different energy within our relationship. But sometimes it's easy to trying to run away from the face of God.
True.
Okay. And so I've seen that dynamic happen very much so. Now, moving on, I think this is what's important. Sometimes in our mourning, we're mourning because of this. When we typically experience significant loss or pain, answers won't necessarily fix our gruesome problems.
That's what the message was.
But his presence will.
Yes.
Okay? And those broken pieces start to come together in his presence. And I know for me, when that pain reemerges and resurfaces, sometimes it's easy to think as we're being transformed into this brand new individual, it's easy to think, now I have the answers. Now I can conquer this. God, thank you for what you've done for me. I have a spirit of gratitude. I've moved in this direction. I see how far I've come because of you. But sometimes then we take the baton and say, okay, I kind of know the answers to this one. And many times you and I know this for us. It's easy to move into that posture of being self-defeated because our answers sometimes don't fix those broken, shattered pieces within us.
You're right. I think Bill Johnson touched on that very, very beautifully in that sermon, that even if he knew all the answers to death, to the cancer that his wife faced. I mean, I'm just paraphrasing. He didn't say it in these words, but it's the meaning of it behind the words that I remember. That if he had all the answers, it absolutely wouldn't fix it. Comfort would fix it.
Comfort would fix it.
Comfort is what was necessary, not problem solving. And I think that is huge, Gordon. It is huge because it means you go beyond your mind into a place where you receive the Spirit.
Right. Right. But Cherise, here's another audience member. Believe me, the voices are coming across the airwaves. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
Okay.
You hear them, huh?
Yeah. But I don't deserve this pain, Cherise.
Yeah.
Well, another reason might be it's important to have the right image of God, because when we get pain and we feel the harshness and the bitterness and the brutality of pain within us, and we know that that's something we're dealing with year after year after year, okay, it's easy to think God is just a God of judgment. God is just harsh and he's punishing me. I stand no chance anyway. And even if I take God out of my life and I'm looking at the universe with karma, well, holy cow, I'm getting more back on pain than I ever unleashed into the universe. What the heck is going on? This image, having the right image of God, is instrumental in how you mourn and how you receive comfort.
I love it. It's true.
Okay, so we know that painful suffering can negatively impact us both physiologically and psychologically, causing increased depression, anxiety, and even having difficulty making simple decisions. But I would encourage people, don't judge yourself just on how much dopamine is suppressed in your brain and how low you might feel. Learn to get a right image of God. Because if you don't have a right image of God, you can't have a right image about your future and how to move forward in transformation. And usually if you don't have that right image, you're not receiving any particular comfort for the things that you're going through. Right. You can't see the deeper meanings behind painful suffering.
That's exactly right.
Okay? So what I'd like you to do, Cherise, because we talked about this yesterday, why don't you express your vision about who God is?
Well, as I continue in my journey in the Song of Songs, okay, I'm just mesmerized in the Passion Translation of it, in the sense of the bride and the groom, and really it's an illustration, even though it's, Song of Psalms is written about Solomon and the Shulamite bride, but truly it's a representation of Christ and us. And in particularly, you can dial it down to be as personal as Christ and how Christ sees you. And I really do get overwhelmed by it, because when I think about that image of God, if I think about him apart from being absolutely one who is ravaged and crazy about me, in love with me, if I think about him as just a God of judgment, a God of wrath, a God that's going to get me at the next turn of life, how can I intersect with that? That's not even true to the DNA in my created being from him. But it's easy to think when you're going through suffering that you're doing it alone and that God isn't there and that you don't deserve it. And I will say, as I read through the Song of Songs, it just helps me to remember who God is. His identity is transcendent over the pain that I feel. And I just, I'm overwhelmed by it. So it talks about in the Song of Psalms 7, the Shulamite bride says in verse 10 in the Passion Translation, "Now I know that I am for my beloved, and all his desires are fulfilled in me."
In other words, God's desires are fulfilled.
How amazing is that? God's desires are not fulfilled in what we're doing for God. God's desires are not fulfilled in the money we can bring to the table for God. God's desires are not fulfilled in like outside of us, in anything else that he created. His desire is fulfilled in me and you, an audience member in you. Even if you don't feel him, even if you think you're in pain and he doesn't see you. And his desire is not fulfilled in your pain, by the way. His desire is fulfilled in who you are and who you are going to become in him. And that's what blows me away. It's just his character is overwhelming in times of mourning, in times of grief. And I can say this, for God himself to have first of all, it tells us something about the nature of God, that he has desires himself. What if God had no desire? He created everything. Everything is his. But he actually does have a desire. Mm-hmm. And that's for his bride. We are his bride.
That's very good, Cherise. I know that when I look at the vision of God, sometimes I think many of us look at God through a lens of our humanity. Okay? And I think when we're struck with pain, we're looking for what the anchor is about who is God. Mm-hmm. And that his answer in Exodus, I am that I am. He is so many layers above us, and there are infinite number of layers of love that we can't even comprehend. I know this, when I started, even in my faith, okay, since 1982, even when I started, I got to the word to say, okay, I've learned about who God is, so here's my foundation. But I've seen this over the years and with the experience of painful suffering. I've actually seen more of the love of God now through painful suffering than I did prior to suffering. And when I first entered the suffering, and that could be a few years, folks, I had to deal with the normal grief process of anxiety and grief and depression and frustration and anger and acceptance and everything that comes with the grief process. But as my humanity shut down, where I developed eyes to see who he was, I started to see words come off of scripture that would pop up. It was like they were underscored. They'd pop up off the pages, and it was like, boy, that's something I need to reconsider about the character of God.
Yes.
And why I'm even here. Okay? So our vision can also grow as we're being transformed.
I love it, Gordon.
Okay? Let's move on to this. So if you're done with this, if you're to the point when you no longer can run from pain, or you no longer have results from getting medication, and basically you know that ignoring pain just basically leads to further consequences, I would pose a challenge question to each person. Why not embrace painful suffering, your painful suffering, and tear-filled loss? Why not embrace it? Now, people are going to say, what do you mean? And it's the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is not pain, by the way.
You're right.
Folks. It's not pain.
Yep.
It's not painful suffering. I mean, suffering is part of life. Okay? We're going to have 4 different seasons and cycles that go on. Not every time is there a summer and a growth and everything is sunshine and everything goes our way. There are different seasons of death and life for all of us, including humanity. So
go back to the elephant in the room.
But the real elephant in the room is this. It's not the pain. It's how you respond to painful trials. It is your response. How you respond. And we can't keep evaluating God's nature based on our experience of loss.
You're right. You're right. We can't put our loss on him and expect him to succumb to that lower level of living when it removes love from the equation.
That's right. So I would say embracing your brokenness means to step into the darker places of pain with an attitude of forgiveness. And we know that forgiveness depowers the clutches of the past over our present day lives. You don't have to let pain become your master for the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
Even if it pops up its head as you're walking in transformation.
Right.
It still does not have to be your master.
It can become a grasshopper even if it hurts.
Right. So how to embrace suffering? I want to bring up two choices that we have regarding with our ideas about brokenness.
Okay.
Number one, we can remain embittered in our hearts about our painful losses.
Mm-hmm.
Many people have. Many people not only are dealing with, for instance, with chronic pain, regardless of the specific diagnosis, and it's usually multi-layered, but there's also a psychological component. You can get to the point where your heart is sick. It's broken. Okay? Or number two, you can embrace your painful afflictions with open arms in order to walk as a transcendent individual. Mm-hmm. You mentioned it earlier in the podcast. You want to transcend. It's not just that here's the problems and I'm going to go over the problems. Mm-hmm. It's this. I'm going to go through them and keep moving upward.
100%.
I'm still going to go through that doorway. Christ is in the doorway He is the door with the furnace of fiery affliction where we can still move upward in Him.
He's the furnace of affliction. He is the door through the furnace of affliction, I would say. That's very true.
Yeah. And I would say this, the further I traveled toward embracing my pain, the more I began to see my brokenness from a new and refreshing perspective.
It's almost like embracing the pain doesn't mean you worship the pain.
No.
Embracing the pain doesn't mean that became your identity. You acknowledged it so you could shift it into its proper place.
Proper perspective.
That's right.
Perspective is powerful. Mm-hmm. If you want to know how inward power starts to just move and move upward, what is your perspective? That would be one question that I would ask. And so when I was embracing pain, it wasn't like, hey, pain, you're my friend and you're my cuddle buddy today. Okay. Boy, you only broke one leg? Let's go break a second leg. We love pain. That's not what we're talking about.
Exactly. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay. And some people need that clarification.
Yeah.
We're talking about the more you embrace pain, your response to pain, you're saying, I'm going to forgive it so it doesn't have power over me.
Yes.
I am not going to be in the clutches of pain.
Right. It's to disengage its power.
Right. And where does the power go? It goes to you. It goes into your perspectives. You start to see the spiritual side of things. You start to do this. Hey, listen, to the parts that pain is almost like a magnifying glass over my humanity. I'm seeing parts of my body. I'm seeing parts of my mind. I'm seeing my emotional reactions. I'm seeing my own spirit. I'm seeing my dedication, my discipline, my love. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing all the parts of who I am.
Wow.
And then there's parts where you go like this, there's parts that are not essential in my life. It's not that I have to banish them or destroy them or take a razor blade to my life. It's that I can do new things and new habits. I'm free. I've embraced pain through forgiveness, and now I am free.
Wow, Gordon. Powerful stuff.
Very powerful stuff. One last topic, and we're going to go over. I want to talk about our worship with God because it's on the same plane, okay?
Okay.
And you and I have talked about prayer, prayer and worship. Mm-hmm. How do we give ourselves all to God when we're broken? Mm-hmm. God, I've only got 25% of me that's worthy of anything. The other 75% is, man, it's toxic, it's broken, it's unrepaired, it's still writhing in pain. What do I give to you? Well, what I've learned is that in our proposition of communication with God, whether it's our worship, our praise, our prayer life, it's not one way. God, see, I used to think when I was first in pain, in order to be humbled and lowly, I just had to worship God, and there were parts in my thoughts where I'd think, God, are you egotistical? Are you the only one that deserves any type of recognition and acknowledgement while other people are suffering? This seems so imbalanced. But as you move on, you see that it's a two-way proposition. And when you praising him for who he is, he's depositing the change within you through the Holy Spirit. You start growing into the words of truth that you praise him with.
That's so good. Because he's depositing who he is
in us,
into who you are.
Right. And our prayer life changes. The way we look at prayer, the way we communicate with God, it doesn't change because we're more mature on our own. It changes because our mind shift has changed towards the love of Jesus Christ.
So good, Gordon.
Okay? Inevitably, we change for the better because of him. Thought for the day or valuable takeaway.
I love that you said something almost poetic. And you said it so fast that people may not have heard it. That pain is like a magnifying glass in your life. And so it covers your humanity. It's like a magnifying glass over your humanity. So a magnifying glass, it looks really ugly when, if you put a magnifying glass on your nose and you see all the pimples or the little spots, that are just deficient, right? So pain can magnify the things that are deficient in us. But what's amazing about that is it also intensifies the relationship with God that is already there waiting. And that is there to set us free. And so this magnifying glass that can actually bring up and show that there is mourning inside of us. It will draw you, if you allow this, and it is your choice, anybody who's listening, but allow it to bring you straight to the arms of the Comforter. When you're thinking, I don't deserve this pain, take it to the arms of the Comforter, the one who loves you.
Very good, Cherise. My valuable takeaway, it's going to be really simple. Do not base God's nature on your experience of loss. Discover the right image of God and move towards him.
I love it.
Forgive your pain. Embrace it. Move forward. And then you're not going to say anymore, I don't deserve the pain. It's not even going to be a thought. Cherise, thank you so much for today's podcast program. I can't wait for next week. But you know what? Before we leave, how do you get a hold of us?
Our website, which is gordonandcherise.com. That is where you can find all of the good stuff from our previous podcast. If you can believe it, we have 108 of them before this one. And then you can also log in and subscribe to YouTube. We really need your comments and everything on YouTube. We need more subscribers there. It really helps with the platform. Our Facebook community continues to grow like crazy. So you can find out how to subscribe to Facebook from our website. Become a part of our Better Living community.
Thank you, everyone. And I just want to say this. Our app is going to be out very, very soon. Okay.
It's going to be exciting.
And that's going to contain everything, including our online courses.
Yep.
So right now, I'm working with Cherise diligently on our second course right now. So we're looking forward to getting several different courses in there where you can sit down and take notes and really walk from point A to point B and restructure your life.
That's right.
If you're struggling with long-term pain.
We'll see you next time.
See you next week.